All right, so I want to show you real quick, this is a pro tip for you, right? When I build websites, this is actually how I start every website. I don't want you guys to do this for your 5-minute websites because I do want you to hand code those from scratch every day. But for future projects, feel free to use this idea. So you see here I have a folder called web template, right? If I look inside of there, there is already an index file. There's already a JavaScript folder, there's already an image folder, there's already a CSS file. Not only that, but in the JavaScript folder, there's actually a JavaScript file, which has, I don't think there's anything in it, but it's there. Yeah, it just says JavaScript stuff, right? Nothing in it. And then inside the image file folder, there are a couple of images. And inside of the CSS folder, there's a CSS file. And it has some CSS in it. So, let me show you why this is useful. When I want to create a new web project, so let's say I'm going to make, I'm going to build a website for, I don't know, an auto detail company, who knows. I will just highlight that folder, Control-C, Control-V, I just copy and pasted it, rename it to auto detail or whatever the name of the company is, and now I have this whole folder that's got my whole structure already set and ready to go. So now I can open this up, I can open up this index, and immediately I see this yellow background, which means I know my style sheet's working, right? Because it's all connected up. And so let's just quickly look in here. In fact, I'm not even going to use today's 5-minute website. I'm going to delete all this. And let me close out Notepad real quick and reopen it. Just today's, this auto detail thing, right? So I'm going to open this in Notepad, and I'm going to open this in Notepad. All right, so this is the default, already set HTML, all ready to go. All I have to do now to build the auto detail site is put all of the stuff in the body tag, right? Notice I'm linked up to a JavaScript file. Don't worry about that. That's for another day. But then I can give it a title here, right? Auto detail or whatever. I'm still going to call it Gettin Fancy, though. Fancy with CSS, okay? And then in my style sheet, I have the reset that I always do, and I also have linked up an actual URL for an image to make a background image, okay? And you may have noticed there was another one called Gray, I think it was. So let's see how that looks. What was it called? I got the wrong name. BG Gray. With an E, yeah. All right, so now we've got this gray background. Okay, so we'll talk about that, how to do background images, maybe another time. Let's see, how much time? Yeah, we can do it right now. Let's just do it. Okay, so what I've got here is on the HTML tag itself, I'm applying a background image, and it works like this. You put background-image, and then you give it a URL. So let's talk about this URL, and then I'll tell you where I got the image to start with. Okay? Notice this URL starts with a dot, and then a slash, and then the word image, or then the folder image, and so forth. So remember, how do file paths work on your local machines, on servers? Where does this HTML look for that style sheet? Where does it go to find it? Yeah, it starts in its own location, right? So that means it starts here. So this index file, which is, let me increase that here. Okay, this index file, which is this file right here, it says, hey, there's supposedly a style sheet somewhere. So it starts here and it goes, oh yeah, I'm supposed to look in CSS, and then there's a file called style.css. Great. All right, well now inside of this style sheet, similar things happening. Inside the style sheet, it says, hey, there's supposed to be a background image. But where is that? It's not inside of the CSS folder. I have to go out of the CSS folder, so I have to go up one level, right? So I have to go up one level to here, and then go down a level into this IMG folder. Well, the way you go up one level, and this is not a CSS thing, this is a computer thing, right? It's, on your Linux machine, on your Windows machine, on your Mac, all of them use the same thing. And to go up one folder, you type .. /. Okay, and I'll show you if I'm on the command line, for example. Right now I'm in C:users JStone54. If I said cd .. it takes me back one folder to the users. If I say cd .. again, it takes me to the root. Okay, make sense? So that's all that's happening here. And by the way, CD stands for change directory. Okay, this isn't a command line course, but I just want to show you that. So this goes up one folder, and then from that folder it goes into the image folder, and then into the image folder it looks for a file called background gray PNG. That's how it finds that, right? Where do we get that from? Where do we get that image? It's a really cool website called subtlepatterns.com, and it goes, they have a new name now, it's Top Tall or something, whatever. But you go through and you look at these and you say, oh, this one looks nice. I think I'll try, what is that, bananas? So if I like this banana one, I just click preview and it shows me what it would look like as the background, right? Or this oriental pattern, or full bloom. This little box one's kind of cool. Oh, that's not what I wanted. Oh, read more, there's no preview on that one. Here, preview. So let's go to this oriental, or the banana one. So, okay, so now I decide, yeah, that one looks cool. I click the download button right here, and it downloads a zip file, you can see, onto my desktop. So I'm just going to extract it, right-click, extract files here. And when it extracts, you'll see a Mac folder, usually, not always, but most of the time. And you also just see this regular one. There's the file right there. Oftentimes this README folder will have, or file will have information about copyright and stuff like that. But we just are looking for this bananas file. So I'm going to move that into my image folder right here for my project. I'm just going to drag bananas right there. And now it's in my image folder for the project. And now if I go to my CSS, I can say bananas. And now if I look at that page, refresh it, yay, I have bananas. Okay? So that's a really cool site for getting free background images that you can put as a background for your web page. But either way, that little trick there to having the whole thing set up in a template that you can just copy and paste and use for your new project, that's how I do all of my projects. Okay? All right, any questions about that? Yeah?
Is the URL link always going to be in single quotes?
No, actually, it doesn't even have to be in quotes at all. In fact, you can just do that, and that should still work. Let's see. Yeah. Yep. That's a habit I have of doing that. In fact, I think double quotes will work too. Let's try that. I can't remember. Yeah, even double quotes. So it's a good idea to use quotes just to get in that habit. But yeah, it works either way. Okay, other questions? Okay, so we're going to pause on the CSS for a minute, and I'm going to tell you about some changes that were made to HTML several years ago that we haven't really talked about that are important to know. So very common in the world of HTML, you would see something like this. You might see div class equals header, and that would have like sort of the header stuff for your web page, like maybe your title or maybe your navigation menu might be up in there or something like that. In fact, another common one you might see, so let's take a look at a real site here. Here's actually a site that I built about a few months ago. This would be header stuff, right? See all this stuff up here? This might be considered header stuff. So this is the main icon, like the home page, sort of the branding of the site. This is the navigation, and then these are cities that he's performed in. Okay, so maybe inside of header I might have a div class equals nav or something like that, and inside of that I might have you know, my navigation or whatever. Okay, I'm not going to write any real code, but I just want to show you the idea. Then you might have something like class equals, you know, main content or something like that. And this would have your main content in it. All right, so we're using Firefox. That's okay. Chrome will come to its senses in just a minute. The point I was getting at here I think Google knew I was about to talk bad about it. So what's happening here, over the years, this was a very common way you'd see websites designed and programmed. Well, what happened, Google did a web crawl of basically every single website on the planet, pretty much. And they wrote down or kept track of in a database what were the most common classes being used. And they found that header was a very common one, nav was a very common one, footer was a very common one. On blogs, they found that rather than main, they would have one called article. And they also found that a very common one on blogs was aside, okay? And I'll just to give you an example of what an aside might be like. magicreviewed.com. Oh, really? My site's down? Oh, man. Let's see if we got internet now. Okay. Now we are. All right, let's try this again. Okay, so I wanted to show you what an aside is and what an article and an aside is. So if you take a look at a blog website, like one of my sites is kind of a blog site, okay? This would be what's considered the main article right here, this chunk right here, okay? This over here would be what's called an aside. And oftentimes you'll see things over here, like in my case, I do have recent comments. So these are comments that are made recently on here, or maybe recent reviews that I published or something like that. So that's what kind of what's an aside would look like, all right? So the reason I'm telling you all this is because when Google did its little search and found all these common classes, they got with the folks at HTML, the W3 Consortium, and they decided that they were going to make some new tags. So they now have, and this is several years ago, but now there is a nav tag, there's a header tag, there's a footer tag, there's an aside tag, there's an article tag, okay? And so what the standard becomes is instead of having class header, you would actually have a header tag. And you close your header tag. Oh, sorry, that should be the nav tag. And you would have your nav tag here. And this is your header closing here. And then this is your article. Right inside of there, you'd have an article and so on and so forth on down the line. Okay, you'd have a footer. I'm just going to delete that aside there, right? But you get the idea. And then we'd have a footer right here. And footer. Okay? So let's take a look at this other site we were looking at a second ago. Sankey Talks. And if you look at the code, by the way, hot tip, Control U on Chrome opens up the code. Okay? Down at the bottom here, you can see, oh, that's too big, that I used a footer tag, right? There's the footer opening, and there's the footer closing tag right there. Okay? I did not use a header, but I did use a nav tag. Right there is the opening nav, and it closes somewhere down there. I'll have to find it. Okay? So this is a common way that you should do your websites now. Now, they act just like a div, right? A header and a footer, they act like a div. They don't change the markup or anything at all, other than it makes your markup semantic. Okay, what I mean by semantic is it clearly defines what the content is. It clearly defines this is the header, this is the navigation, this is the article, this is a footer, so on and so forth. Okay, make sense? The standard, the HTML5 standard is to make your markup semantic like this by using the proper tags to make it clear what your content is. Because remember, HTML has one purpose: describe content. That is it. That's all its life is. That's its whole purpose. Okay. All right. So no questions on that. We're going to take a look at a really cool concept that we're going to learn more about in depth next week. But I'm going to introduce you to the basics of it today, and that concept is called responsive web design. Okay. So I'm going to show you a website that is not responsive first. Magic Warehouse. This is not a site that I've built. This is just a magic site that's out there. Okay? So, notice what happens when I resize this window. Okay? When I get smaller and smaller, Suddenly, right about here, look at this. That menu just goes off the page and you have to scroll. Well, that's okay, I guess, in a browser on a computer like this, but this, imagine this is a mobile device with the screen that wide. Now you have to pinch and zoom for everything, right? That's really bad design, okay? So let's take a look at the two sites that I built. This one, first one, as I resize it, watch what happens, okay? Notice those banners on the side. These are advertisers, or in this case, they're my own ads, but I've also had advertisers pay to be there. So as I shrink this, there comes a point where I make those ads just kind of disappear because the content starts to get a little too squishy. But so far, everything looks okay. As I'm shrinking it now, notice the aside right here goes away, and these ads go away, okay? The ads go away, but the aside didn't go away. It got moved down to here, down at the bottom. Now the recent comments and the recent reviews are down here. Notice that this video got bigger and it takes up more of the screen. Also notice this Magic Reviewed logo right here and the menu. Watch what happens. The menu moves down here. This logo gets bigger. The search box gets bigger. And as I keep shrinking, eventually that menu, so the image got smaller. Now you're thinking this is more like maybe a small tablet or something like that. And now we're getting to maybe a bigger phone or a smaller tablet. Notice the menu here. Now it's expandable like this. Keep shrinking, and you can watch these things down here, how they change with the flow. Okay? And so this is a pretty narrow device, and it still looks pretty good on a narrow device. There's no pinching and zooming. No vertical, or no horizontal scroll bar. Okay? Let's take a look at Sankey Talks. Same thing's gonna happen here. Oh man. Let me get it bigger first. Sorry guys. So here's basically full size for Sankey Talks here. Okay, notice this is 2 columns for these testimonials here. There's a footer down here. Watch as I shrink, and also when you hover over this, you got this little menu here. As we shrink, see, look at what happened to the logos right there. Do you see that? The space between them shrank up a little bit. Also notice this little thing here that says I'm Jay Sankey. As we shrink it, that will start resizing, and eventually it'll change its position right there. See it? Also, let's go back here. Notice the logo here in the top left corner. It starts to shrink up a little bit right there, and the cities start to wrap. We keep shrinking. And there comes a point where this video starts to get a little too small, and this text here doesn't quite look right. So right there, when that starts happening, we shift to where his face is full front and center there, and the video's down below it. And notice now that these testimonials are in 1 column instead of 2. Okay, and we keep going. Watch the menu in the top right corner. And now it says menu. Also notice the word Jay Sankey disappeared. We just have the logo now. I click on menu. It brings up these links here and the talks menu right there. And now these are no longer a hover effect. They're a click effect because it's on a mobile device where you don't have a hover, right? So now they're tappable, not hoverable. All of this stuff is done. That's as narrow as it's going to get. Okay, all of this stuff is done with CSS. Okay, using what's called media queries. We're going to learn about media queries next. I don't know if it's next time, but probably next week. I think is when it's on the schedule. I'll have to look. We'll be learning about those in depth later. But there's a couple of things I want to show you to help make your websites sort of automatically responsive without media queries, okay? You're still gonna need them eventually, but we're gonna look at a few little tips and tricks here. All right, so let's clear all this junk out of here. And I'm gonna create a div that has an H1 in it. And it's just heading 1, or let's say hello number 1. And inside of there, I'm gonna actually have another div in that div, right? So I'm gonna nest the div, and it's gonna have an H1. And then I'm going to have another div inside of there, and it has an H1. Okay. Now I'm closing that div, closing that div, and closing that div. Everybody follow what I did there? Okay, just this div right here has an H1 in it, but it also has a div that has an H1 and another div inside of it, right, and so on. So they're just nested, okay, and you can see that. All right, so now let's go to our CSS. Let's clear all this stuff out of here. And I'm going to say that divs are, let's go font size 100 pixels, okay? So here we go. If I look at the page here, the divs each have a font size of 100 pixels. Now notice the H1s. The H1s are children of the div, so they inherit the font size of their parent. Okay, that's why they're also 100 pixels. Does everybody understand that part? Okay, that's just basic inheritance. Well, there's another way you can actually look at size in CSS. You don't have to use pixels. You can use what's called ems, okay? EM. It's pronounced M, so I could say like 0.5 ems, okay? And it's pronounced M because it's actually referring to the letter M. It actually has its foundation or background in print media, okay? But it has to do with the size of an M in a particular font, the letter M in a particular font. But here's what this means. This means now that divs are 50% the size of their parent. So if that's the case, what do you expect this to look like when I refresh it? I think you're saying it right. Yeah, it's going to be progressively smaller, okay? So this one is 50% the size of its parent. So let's give its parent, the main, the body, let's give it a specific height. We'll say, or font size, I should say. 100 pixels, okay? So the body, which is the parent of the first div, is 100 pixels. Well, the first div is 50% of that. So this first div right here is 50 pixels, right? This next div is 50% of that, which makes it 25 pixels. This next div is 50% of that, which makes it 12.5 pixels, okay? Why is that useful? Because by changing just this one value right here, I don't know, 75, whatever, I can completely change the whole size of everything by changing one little value. And when we learn about media queries, you'll learn how to write CSS code that says, hey, if the browser window is this big, use this CSS rather than that CSS, right? We'll learn about that next time, in a week or so. So you'll learn that, oh, when the window shrinks, I'm going to change from 100 to 75, and it'll make everything shrink with it. And that's exactly what's going on here as we shrink this up. See how this text is really small? It's because I used a media query to change it, and some of these are changing relative to their parent, some of them are not, okay? All right, now, sometimes this effect of this sort of tapering size is not what you want, right? And so they came up with this other thing called RMs, right? Or REMs, but it stands for root M, okay? Which means now you are 50% of the root size. Well, what's the root in this case? So the root element is the body. It goes all the way up to the parent's parent's parent, right? And so this means that you're 50% of the root. Well, that is, oops, I didn't save it. That makes them all the same size. They're 50% of 100 pixels, or 75 pixels, whatever I had in there, yeah. 50% of 75 pixels. So they're all 50% of the root. So that, again, it allows you to make things relative to some main font size that you're starting with. And so it's very common to pick, for the body, a particular font size, and then use rems or ems to make everything else based on that size, so that your whole web page has relative looking sizes, right? So you don't end up with like a really huge heading, right? And then little teeny fonts. You make it all relative to each other so that as the heading shrinks, everything else shrinks, okay? Make sense? Okay, so this is relatively straightforward. I'm going to show you one other little trick here with images that, let's go with, so I'm going to get rid of all these divs here. Just going to put an image in. All right, and we'll go, let's do like a big one, like 1,000 by 1,000. See if they have one that big. Not sure if they do. Yay. Okay. So now look at this picture here of Bill Murray. If I scroll over, see how it's scrolling? That's. Let me go back to normal size here. Okay. As I resize this window, we get this problem with the image like we had on that one site, right? Where the image doesn't resize with the window. Okay. There's a very simple solution for that, and that's using a property called max width. So I'm going to put on images that there's a maximum width of 100%. Okay? That means the widest it can be is 100% of its parent. So now what happens if I refresh the page and I resize it? The image, it's only allowed to be up to 100%. It can't be bigger than the window. So it will resize as I resize the browser. That's a very simple way to make your images responsive. Okay? Now, there may come a point where you want to say, okay, when my screen's this wide, that image is still too big. And you might write a media query, which we'll learn about later, that says, make this image half that big when you get to this size, right? But for now, just making the image to be able to flex with the window, right? Just using the max width property, very simple. Okay? All right, questions about that? The plan today is to throw a whole bunch of concepts at you, just a hodgepodge of different things that are related to sort of, they're not quite advanced CSS topics, but they're things that make your websites just a little bit better. And the next one we're going to talk about is a thing called Flexbox. I'll get you in a second. It's a thing called Flexbox. And I'm going to do some rapid fire stuff with Flexbox, not intending for you guys to have mastered it or fully grasp it all right now, but I'm going to give you a couple resources for you to look at that will help you understand it a little bit better. Yeah, so Dallas's question was, does that max width work on anything? And the answer is yes. Anything that has a width property also has a max width property. There's also a minimum width, min width, and there's also a max height and a min height as well. Okay, so this next thing I want to take a look at here is something that before this existed, the things we're going to be able to do right now were nearly impossible. But with this new thing, I say new, it's a few years old now, there's so much possible that we can do now. So I'm going to create a div here with a class called outer div, and inside of there, I'm going to create a couple that have inner. Okay, and we'll just put some letters in here. That, okay? And let's get rid of all the CSS. All right, so this is what we have, right? A, B, C, D. I'm going to put a border on both the outer div, and we'll call that background, or border 1 pixel solid red. And we'll do one on the inner divs. Blue, okay? All right, so that hopefully is what you expected to see when I did those borders. The A, B, C, D take up the whole width of their parent, right? Now, we know that if we, let's go ahead and break this down to a couple lines here. We know that if we add a width to the divs, like 100 pixels, that they now only take up that much space. And if we want them to be butted up against each other, we could float them, right? We remember that? So I could float them. I'm going to make that 50 pixels. But watch what happens when I float them. Look at my red border. Collapsed. Okay? We're going to learn what that is later. I'm just going to quickly tell you how to fix it because I want to move on to the real reason we're looking at this. But what's happening here is it's an overflow problem, And the solution to fixing that is that you make the overflow hidden on the outer div. Don't worry about that right now. Just push the I believe button, right, and just accept it. Okay, we'll learn about it another time. But that will get rid of that problem. So that I didn't want to, that's not why we're here, is to look at that problem. What we're here to look at is, what if I wanted to center these blue divs? What if I wanted to be centered right there? Well, I could maybe put some padding in front of the A one or something like that, but I want them to stay centered all the time. Well, with just regular divs and what we know about divs, that's almost impossible, okay? It can be done, but it's very tricky and it's very difficult. And actual master's theses have been written on this, like doctoral theses and master's theses and papers and stuff have been written on this subject, okay? It's a tricky subject. So there's a new thing that came out a few years ago that's pretty much widely supported by all browsers now, and it's a new display property, all right? So in my outer, that's where I meant to be here. In the outer here, we know about this one, right? Display, and what are the values we know about here? Inline block, block, and here's one we haven't talked about, none. Watch what happens when I do none. It makes it go away, right? Which can be useful, like my little banner ads on the side of that one website, that's what I use, display none, when I shrink the window up, okay? But we don't want to do that one. We want to do display flex, okay? Display flex is a new one that we haven't learned, and now it looks just like float, right? Oh, let me turn off the float here. Still looks just like the float, okay? Here's what this means. Display flex on the parent, right? This is outer, this is the parent of all these divs. When I put display flex on here, this means all of my children are what are called now flex items, which means I can do lots of cool, fancy things with them. Okay, thing number one, I can justify content center. And lo and behold, it just centers them. Okay, perfectly, no problem. Okay, that's one thing I can do. All right. I could also say justify content space between, which will evenly distribute the space that's remaining. Okay, and no matter what, that space will stay evenly distributed, right? Now, eventually, it's going to get a little crowded here, and we'll talk about how to deal with that in a few minutes, okay? You can also do what's called space around. And space around will distribute space around each block there, like that. So now it's evenly distributed around each block, okay? And the only reason it's wider in between here is because there's only a left margin over here, and this has got a left and a right, the right from the A and the left from the B. That's why those are a little wider, okay? There's also flex start, which is the default, which just butts everything to the left. There's also flex end, which puts it at the end of where the flexing happens, that way, okay, which is a little different than floating right. Remember, because floating right reverses the order, okay? So there's lots of different things you could do there. Well, we could also, I'm going to put a height on the outer div of 500 pixels. Okay? Notice what happens to everything in between. Okay? It stretches to the height of its parent automatically. Try doing that with regular divs, man. It's a pain. It's almost impossible, okay, to get all the divs to float like that or to stretch like that. I could also say align. Let me get these back to the center first real quick. Align items, so here's another new property. And by the way, justify content and align items only work when you're display flex. If you're not display flex, these properties don't work at all, okay? Align items, and I'm gonna say center. And look at that. It just centers it dead center in the parent, which again, doing that with regular divs with the display block is almost impossible. Okay. All right, now, if I want to, let's say that I had maybe some extra content in here. Okay. That one will resize to hold how much is there, And if we want, we can make all of them resize to match that by getting rid of this and now they'll resize completely like we looked at a second ago, okay? And let's take the height off of here so we can get a better view of what's happening there, okay? So this is stretching to fit how much space it needs, and the siblings, if you will, A, B, and D, will stretch with it, okay? If I left them at align items center, then everything still centers, but that one just stretches out the way it needs to be, okay? The default is stretch. Align items default is stretch, which is what happens if you don't put anything or if you actually put stretch, okay? There's also flex start, just like before, which pushes everything to the top. There's flex end, which pushes everything to the bottom, all right? Lots of different things you can do with Flexbox. And just by notice here, it's just 2 or 3 lines of code that I can change to completely change the layout of the website, okay? All right, one last thing I want to look at, then we're going to move into some fancy little CSS things that are pretty cool. So let me get rid of all this extra text here. And we're going to go with space around, and we're going to get rid of that. Okay, and now we have these being evenly distributed inside of here, right? But what happens when I start shrinking this up? They get a little bit crowded there, right? Let's make them a little bit bigger. All right, let's make these just a hair bigger, like 100 pixels, okay? What I want them to do is, I don't want them to squish up against each other. I want them to wrap, okay? Well, the default behavior, there's a property called flex wrap. The default behavior is no wrap. I can't remember if it's one word or if it's a hyphenated word. That's the default, but we're gonna do wrap, okay? And so now what'll happen is I resize this. When it starts to feel a little squished, it'll wrap. And it automatically keeps everything nice and lined up and centered, and it'll keep wrapping. Okay, let me put a margin on those. On these guys here. Okay, so when we're full screen, we get this. And as we're resizing everything, you'll see that it just automatically wraps itself. You don't have to even think about it. This is all thanks to this really cool property called Flexbox. It's a really cool idea called Flexbox, okay? How do we feel about all that? Good? All right, this stuff is somewhat exciting. There's a lot more you can do with Flexbox. I'm gonna quickly show you where you can go to see that. If we go in the modules here, down here in module 2, there is, where are we at? Here we go, the resources section. There's 2 Flexbox links here. Go to both of those and read up on Flexbox and learn how it works. It's very, very cool. And this site right here is completely built with Flexbox, which allows for a lot of and so is this, my Magic Reviewed, wherever that one went. That's also built with Flexbox, okay? All right, any questions about any of that stuff? So let's take a look now at this stuff I think you guys will be more excited about, okay? But we have to get this stuff in there because it's important to understand. So I'm going to clear all this stuff out. And I'm going to clear out the CSS here. And I'm going to put in a bunch of links real quick. And we'll just call it link 1. Okay, we'll just do 4 of them here. All right, so here we go. We got 4 links, and what if I'm going to make these a horizontal menu? What are the rules? What's rule number 1? Talked about this the other day. Come on. Nobody. That's what I named them. I said, rule number 1, do this. And I said, rule number 2, do this.
Set inline blocks.
Yes, very good. Set the LIs and the anchors to be display inline block, like that. So now if I refresh that page, there's our menu right there, right? Okay, let's give it a little bit of style real quick, and then we'll get to the real meat of what we're looking at here. Okay, so I'm gonna style up the anchors, and we're gonna give it a background color of what, Sarah?
I'm the color picker, huh?
Yes,
Orange.
orange. Okay, and I'm gonna pick the front color of green because those look kind of cool together. All right, and then we'll give it a little padding of like top and bottom of 10, left and right of 20, and let's see how that looks. Oh, it's stuck there. That's weird. Yeah, that looks pretty good. I'm gonna get rid of that text underline. Okay, now I'm gonna put a hover effect on it. Before I do though, I want to change that font to something that looks a little cooler. So I'm going to show you how to import fonts that you can get from Google. If you go to google.com/fonts, they have all these fonts that you can use here. So let's say I like this big bold one right here. If I click on the plus sign here, it adds that down here to my little selection. What it does is it tells me how do I refer to the font and how do I get access to it. So it gives me a link to a style sheet that's hosted on Google. So there I copy that link and I put that right here. It's just another style sheet right there. Okay, see, it's relationship style sheet, and this is the path to that style sheet. Okay, and then it's telling me in my CSS how do I refer to that font right here. And so now in my CSS, I can simply say that, okay? So the font's called Notable. Then you'll notice this comma sans serif. What that is, if Notable somehow isn't available in the browser, then it'll default to the browser's default sans serif font, okay? And so here we go. Now if I refresh, now I have that font, okay? You go to Google Fonts, and there's thousands of fonts in there, all right? One other quick thing I want to show you. Let's say I also wanted another font from here, like we'll go with this one. If I click the add button and I come down here, it actually updates this link right here. So now if I just use this one instead of the one I had, you'll see that it's going to replace this one completely. And you'll notice it added this Chickle or whatever and Notable. Okay, so now both fonts are available to me. And this shows me how to refer to the Chickle font, okay? So let's say I want to use that instead of that one, okay? Make sense? All right, so now, oops, I have that font, okay? All right, next up I'm going to put a hover effect on it, all right? And the hover effect I like to do usually is, where I change the color and background. So the color will become orange and the background color will become green. So you get this effect, which is a cool effect. Now, so far everything I've done, other than the Google font, you guys should all know how to do. This is all stuff we've already covered. Here's the part we haven't covered. That flickers pretty quickly, in my opinion. I would like that to actually transition a little bit more slowly. So the way to do that is in the original starting point, which is the anchor tag here, we're going to put a property called transition. And I want to transition the color at 500 milliseconds. And I want to transition the background color also at 500 milliseconds. Now watch what happens when I refresh. Check this out. We get a nice little transition type effect. Okay? Way cooler looking, way better. I could also, let's say I want to make the font size 25 pixels. And so I'm going to transition the font as well, font size at 500 milliseconds. So now when I hover over it, it slowly grows. Okay? And we get that nice smooth transition there. Okay? So I'm going to get rid of that font size thing. Here's the thing though, after a while this can get kind of unwieldy if you keep adding properties to it. So sometimes you can just, this is enough, just do 500 milliseconds on everything, on all. Okay? Depending on what you're doing, that can be a little bit of a resource problem, but most of the time you should be okay with that. So now it's transitioning everything with this nice fading effect. Okay? To me that makes your site look way better. Yeah. So what do you mean do it to images? What would you want to do?
Sometimes websites have a thing like if you hover over an image, it kind of grows. Is that how you do that?
Yeah, because it's just a hover effect. Anything that's going from one state to another, you can put a transition on it. Yeah. So you can also, like for example, what if I wanted to change the border radius to 5 pixels? I could do this. When I hover over it now, I get this cool little effect. See that? How it slowly turns. Also, let's get rid of that. I'm going to get rid of both of these now. You can actually sort of animate the box if you wanted to. So there's a property called transform, and it is expecting, there's multiple things it can take in as a value, but the one we're going to use is called rotate, and we're going to rotate it like 7 degrees. So now when I hover over it, I get this effect. Right? It's kind of cool. Also, I can start with it rotated, right? I can just make it start rotated to where that's what it always looks like. Okay? So it always looks like that. And in fact, I think it's Joe's Crab Shack uses that technique, if I'm not mistaken. They've changed their site. Their site used to look sort of like a little bar with a background and these little wooden planks that had the menu on it, and they were hanging kind of crooked like that. It's been a while since I've been here, so apparently they've changed it. But the idea here is if it fits the style of your site, this crooked thing, and then you can, when you hover over it, rotate it back. Transform, rotate, 0 degrees. So now when I hover over it, it rotates to a normal size. Okay? Also, by the way, in case you're curious, so I'm going to get rid of this so it starts off normal and rotate it at 180. So when I go over it, you get this kind of effect. Okay? You can also do, there's no limit on how much you can do. Right, that's a 360 rotation. And I'm going to slow it down to like 5 seconds for this next one. As you saw, I accidentally typoed and I put an extra 0 in there. I've done that before. And when I hover over that, this is the effect you get. That's a 3,600 degree rotation. Right, and then you move out and it goes back. Okay? Less is more, folks. Don't overdo it with this stuff. Okay? It's cool looking, but it's, you know, and it depends on what your site is, right? It depends on what your site's all about, what you're trying to do, okay? All right, any questions about any of that? All right, I need to pause for a second here. So the reason I'm showing you this, let me quickly show you the Magic Reviewed site here. This menu is exactly doing that. You notice the slow transition, the fade in and out, okay? When I hover over those items, it has a fade where the background of the text changes to white and the background changes to blue, okay? That's exactly what I'm doing. I'm just doing a fade in and out with a transition property, okay? And then when I'm on the page, I think I showed you guys this the other day, but when I'm on the page, then it gets highlighted in orange, okay? All right, so this kind of stuff, let me get rid of that 3600 there. Just give it like a slight tilt, maybe 5 degrees, and we'll go back to 500 milliseconds. Okay, you'll also see, yeah, that's exactly what's going on here. See that little effect when I hover over it? How the whole box kind of tilts? Now that, in hindsight, I probably shouldn't make that font change colors there. It should just stay orange and then just have the box tilt, okay? And then same thing's happening down here with my little social icons. They just tilt with a little bit of a transition, okay? That's all that's happening here. But I think you can see that that brings life to your website, right? It takes a plain website and gives it life. You can also do, here's a cool little trick. Let's, anchor tags, let's give them a width of 100 and a height 100. So they're squares. Okay, forget the text for just a minute. And now I can, rather than rotate them, I'm going to do border radius 50%. That turns them into a circle. Okay? Now, this may not be ideal for navigation, right, which is what I'm doing here, but just for a cool effect on your website, maybe when you hover over a picture or something like that. In fact, maybe you'd want to do it the other way, where you start off with border radius of 50%, and then you switch to, I think 0 is the right way to do that. So it starts as a circle, and when you hover over it, it turns into a square where maybe you can see the full picture or something like that. I'm sure you've seen websites where there's a picture and there's a circle around the picture, right? That's pretty common design these days. So if you had that, and let's go to regular size here. If you had that, and then you hover over it, it turns square, maybe you can see the rest of the picture. Or maybe it grows or something like that. Oops, did I just close that? I meant to do that. Okay, so lots of cool things you could do with this effect. It's a nice looking transition, and you can speed that up, slow it down. You can use seconds or milliseconds. Lots of different things, okay? I'm gonna just check my notes here real quick, see if there's anything else I wanted to cover related to this. I think we're good. Oh yeah, there's one other thing I want to show you real quick. Those of you who watched my color video, anybody watch it? Kim did. Yay, Kim. Okay. In the color video, I talk about this website. It's Adobe it's color wheel. Okay, and I talk about how to use this site. And real quick, I'm going to download an image here so we can use, actually that one's got not enough color in it. Let me find one that's got more color. Recent reviews. This one is, okay. Where's the actual product details? There we go. File, save image. All right, so I'm gonna download that image. You'll see why in a second. So on the color wheel here, this color wheel, it allows you, oh, they changed things on me. Huh, I won't be able to use that image. That's okay. So this allows you to pick a spot, pick a type of pattern, like let's go with triad, where it splits the color wheel into 3, and then it has these are colors that work in this sort of triad arrangement. And so why this is useful is because you can come on here and say, maybe if I rotate this way, okay, you'll see that that looks like, oh, let's back up here, like right around here. If I was making a website about the Hulk, I'd probably pick this color scheme, right? The purple with his pants and the orange and the green. But the idea, though, is it splits the color wheel up, and now these are colors that supposedly work well together. I'm not a color theorist. I don't know if that's true or not, okay? But that's the theory. They're supposed to. There's also complementary colors that are across the color wheel from each other, right? And again, I can rotate this around. I can move these in and out, up and down. But all these things, if you're looking for a color theme or color scheme, then this might be useful, right? There's shades where they're all shades of the same color. So if I want, these are all shades of pink, right? Shades of like a darker pink or sort of, it's kind of a cool color theme. Monochromatic, so you can choose all these different ones. And then here, this is what I was looking for, import an image. If I click on here, pull that image in, it will make a color scheme based on the image. So if your website has images on it that match maybe like for example, if maybe we had the Salt Lake Community College logo and we were building a website around that, we can import it into here and we can look and say, okay, if I'm going to build a website about the college, maybe I should use this color palette. And to get a hold of those colors, you just click on any given color, and let's go back. I should be able to, yeah, that's weird. It's not letting me actually get them. Let's go back here to the color wheel. In this case, yeah, there we go. So now this is the color palette, and if I click on any one of these, that's the hex color right there. Here's the hex for the green right there. There's the hex for that grayish color, and there's the hex for the yellow, and so forth. So I can grab those and just dump them into my HTML. Okay? Go watch my color video. It's actually inside the CSS Day 1 lecture. There's 3 videos in there. The color video's in there. Okay? So these are lots of cool tools that, as a CSS person, as a front-end developer, as a web programmer, they're very useful, very good to know. Any questions, folks? Okay, let me just show you where we're at in the modules, and then we'll let you split. Okay? So right here, module 2. Getting Fancy with CSS. That was today. On Tuesday, we're going to talk about mobile first and responsive design. We're going to learn how to write media queries and how to make your website resize with the browser and adjust things, okay? And then that's it for CSS. After that is the midterm, okay? We'll have a day dedicated to prepping for the midterm, where I'm basically going to do the midterm on the screen, and you guys will kind of watch the idea of it. And then you'll have the midterm that'll be due on the 14th of October. Then when we come back from that, which is actually will be after the fall break, right? The fall break is on the 18th and 19th of October. When we get back from that, we'll learn advanced CSS, where we're going to get into actual animation, like making stuff move around on the page. We'll get into advanced selectors. We'll look at the grid. And then you guys are going to watch me build a website from the ground up by looking at a Photoshop document, and I'm going to hand code everything from scratch in class. Okay, that'll be it, and then we're done with CSS and we move into JavaScript. Okay, any questions? Have a great weekend, folks. We'll see you.